BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNet88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And welcome to BBOR, the home of true crime talk radio and your premier destination for unsolved mysteries, criminal psychology, and exploring the dark side of cyberspace. My name is Ned DeHaan, and I am your host, as well as the creator of Astro Psych 400 here on YouTube, and regular contributor to the Zodiac Killer channel. And a great way to support these shows is just by listening to some more content. But you can also go over to Amazon.com and have a look at the book Killer on a White Horse, written by me, Ned DeHaan. It is a novel, murder mystery, inspired by the Zodiac Manson connection, but it is indeed fictional. However, who doesn't love a good mystery? And there is always the TeeSpring page. Feel free to check out some of the merchandise. And remember, being weird is not a crime. Let the show begin. Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to this special weekend episode of Black Box Online Radio. On the weekends, I've been doing a regular segment about the murder of JonBenet Ramsey from 1996, and lately I've been following the book The Death of Innocence, which was written by JonBenet's parents, John and Patsy Ramsey. And right now, the book is dealing with the events of December 26th of 1996, where the Ramseys have woken up in Colorado shortly after Christmas, as I said, December 26th, and they've noticed that their daughter, JonBenet, a former pageant queen, was nowhere to be found in the upper levels of their home. And, it's a very saddening story, and I'd like to say one more rest in peace to JonBenet, as well as any of the other murder victims who are discussed here on Black Box Online Radio. This is primarily a true crime channel, where every Monday is Zodiac Mondays, and Wednesdays have lately been devoted to Jack the Ripper, and perhaps the world's most famous unsolved murder mystery, although the Zodiac Killer is getting rather high up there in terms of people's curiosity, let's say, and perhaps there'll be some other segments and other unsolved mysteries that will be discussed on the Anything Goes Friday segment. So if anybody would like to support these efforts, you can hit the like button, subscribe, follow along with the channel regularly, share on social media, share anything about this with people who are curious about true crime cases. And of course, you can go over to BuyMeACoffee.com, BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNet88. That allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show. And anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. So, I did one episode where I was talking about the Nancy Drew channel, and there was a partial book review of The Death of Innocence on the Nancy Drew channel, and I invite you to check that one out too. But the partial book review only went up to chapter 6 of The Death of Innocence, and there was a very odd statement in there talking about the behavior of John and Patsy Ramsey following the events of Christmas Day 1996. As previously stated, they claimed they woke up on December 26th and their daughter's missing, and then they later found her dead in their home. She had been struck in the head and then strangled, and then her asphyxiated. But there's a very odd detail, and that is that JonBenet's mother, Patsy Ramsey, did not change her clothes from the night before, and she also did not take off her makeup. And a lot of people think that that's pointing toward Patsy's guilt in some way. And that, the explanation that was provided in the Nancy Drew book review was that their shower was broken, so that's why Patsy didn't change her clothes or take off her makeup. But actually reading the book The Death of Innocence and reading this second chapter where those events are discussed, there is a little bit of clarification, although the entire situation isn't necessarily told to us. And I think that that is so bizarre in a book called The Death of Innocence, written by JonBenet's parents, where they're trying to set the record straight, yet they aren't completely covering all the bases. But anyway, I'll read this little segment here for you. I think to myself, just put my clothes on and of course my makeup. I remember my mother's words, never leave the house without your makeup. Plus we're going to be with Melinda's fiance, Stuart, so I want to make a good impression. Slowly the normal routine for an early morning flight comes into focus. Take a shower, get dressed, and get going. I swing out of bed and abruptly remember that my shower is still broken. Gotta be at the airport by 6:30, going to push us because time is so short. I reach for my clothes and start dressing. And what I think this means is that Patsy Ramsey didn't spend the night in the clothes that she had been wearing from the night before. And again, from this piece of text, I think it means that she did indeed remove her makeup and that perhaps, she got down to her undergarments or something like that, or changed into night clothes for the for the evening once the family got home on Christmas night, and then she simply put on the old clothes that she had worn the previous day. That's my interpretation of this. And then she had removed her makeup from the night before and then did her makeup very early that morning before they even knew that JonBenet was missing, because she never leaves the house without makeup. That's my interpretation of that piece of text. But again, it really just isn't saying everything point by point, saying, oh yeah, I slept in my night clothes, I wore the same clothes from the night before because they were easily available, and I took my makeup off and then I put it on. We're led to believe that, but the entirety of this could be clearer, and that's the one thing that is frustrating, because I will reiterate a particular point. This book, The Death of Innocence, is supposed to be trying to set the record straight. Alright, so now the actual events that I think people are very curious about. And this relates to Patsy Ramsey going downstairs in the Ramsey's household and discovering a ransom note. And again, in Chapter 2, the ransom note is shared, the entire text of it, that is. And I would like to read that for you because I think for this episode, I would like to concentrate on the text of the ransom note. Mr. Ramsey, listen carefully. We are a group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction. We respect your business, but not the country that it serves. At this time, we have your daughter in our possession. She is safe and unharmed. If you want her to see 1997, you must follow our instructions. You will withdraw $118,000 from your account. $100,000 will be in $100 bills, and the remaining $18,000 in $20 bills. Make sure that you bring an adequate size attaché to the bank. When you get home, you will put the money in a brown paper bag. I will call you between 8 and 10 a.m. tomorrow to instruct you on delivery. The delivery will be exhausting, so I advise you to be rested. If we monitor you getting the money early, we might call you early to arrange an earlier delivery of the money and hence an earlier pickup of your daughter. Any deviation from my instructions will result in the immediate execution of your daughter. You will also be denied the remains for proper burial. The two gentlemen watching over your daughter do not particularly like you, so I advise you not to provoke them. Speaking to anyone about your situation, such as the police, FBI, etc., will result in your daughter being beheaded. If we catch you talking to a stray dog in any way, she dies. If you alert bank authorities, she dies. If the money is in any way marked or tampered with, she dies. You will be scanned for electronic devices, and if any are found, she dies. You can try to deceive us, but be warned that we are familiar with law enforcement countermeasures and tactics. You stand a 99% chance of killing your daughter if you try to outsmart us. Follow our instructions and you stand a 100% chance of getting her back. You and your family are under constant scrutiny, as well as the authorities. Don't try to grow a brain, John. You are not the only fat cat. Don't try to grow a brain. You're not the only fat cat around, so don't think that killing will be difficult. Don't underestimate us, John. Use that good southern common sense of yours. It is up to you now, John. Victory. SBTC. When I was reading my copy of The Death of Innocence and I got to the ransom note, Halfway through, I just had this immediate response, and that was that there's almost no way that this was written by a woman. I mean, some people think that Patsy Ramsey wrote the ransom note, and I shouldn't say written by a woman, composed by a woman, that this is the voice of a woman talking. And yes, of course, that leads some people to think that, oh, well, a woman wrote the ransom note, but it was a man dictating it to her. I mean, this language is very technical. The vocabulary is relating more to objects than it is to people, and talking about familiarity with police countermeasures. And yeah, a woman could say something like that, but I think, in my own immediate response, that this was written by a man. And also, it's talking about how there are just, well, firstly, harming a child again, beheading the girl. All of these things seem more in line with what I think a man would say rather than a woman. Now, if you want to talk about a man is dictating the words to a woman and she's writing them down, well, that's a different kettle of fish for a very obvious reason. He would be composing the text. But I would love to know your response to my statement about how I think this note was composed by a male as opposed to a female. Please put your idea in the comment section down below. Now, I've talked about the murder of JonBenet Ramsey before on the channel, and one commenter named Professor Stewart wrote in by saying that he is a professor, and some of his students who are from foreign countries and do not have English as a first language will often try to overinflate their vocabulary and their expressions and their idioms to try and sound more authentic, but in the process, by some ironic fashion, they actually sound less authentic. And some examples of that would be talking about, like, the phrase, don't grow a brain, John, where, I mean, maybe they're trying to think about don't try to be a smartass or something, and openly stated in the letter, don't try to outsmart us. But by saying don't grow a brain, John, they're trying to use an idiom, but almost misstating it in some way. And that's a rather interesting theory, because that would mean that you're not even dealing with a member of the Ramsey family being responsible for JonBenet's death. What if there actually is a small foreign faction that was responsible? I mean, okay, I'm going to get right to the heart of a particular issue. Back in 2018, I did several black box recordings about JonBenet Ramsey. I mean, all kinds of things. I talked about how I thought that her parents, John and Patsy Ramsey, were innocent. I also talked about how I was going through different sources, particularly the Sweetie Bee documentary and the Netflix documentary Casting JonBenet, and watching one of the films that, oh, they made this dramatization. It's a crime drama film about the Ramsey murders. And what was truly interesting about it was that they actually discussed the true crime theories in it. You know, it's just like so many scenes were just people having conversations about the true crime theories, and I can't remember the name of that movie for the life of me, but I'm going to be searching for it there on. So I'm going through all this stuff about the murder of JonBenet Ramsey, and at that time, my conclusion was that the ransom note was a diversion. The ransom note was not only like inauthentic. I mean, we know that it wasn't authentic because JonBenet wasn't truly abducted. She was moved to the basement of the house, and that's where she was found. And she was found shortly after the authorities arrived, and shortly after the discovery of said ransom note. So, I mean, no, she wasn't even truly kidnapped. I mean, maybe you could call that an abduction. The word abduction doesn't necessarily mean transporting the body. An abduction can be restraining and confining someone as well. But, I mean, I thought it was a diversion because someone or a group of people had tried to abduct JonBenet Ramsey and taken her from the home, transporting her, and that she passed away from her injuries much earlier on, and then they decided to leave her there, and they wrote the ransom note as a diversion to make sure that they wouldn't be interrupted in any way while they were trying to escape. And yes, I was all about the theory that an intruder was responsible for the murder of JonBenet Ramsey, and I do lean to that way. However, I mean, I am forced to admit now, at this time, that I don't truly know what happened to her, and I think that all the possibilities on the table have a certain degree of merit. But this whole thing about how she's going to be beheaded, no, JonBenet, of course, wasn't beheaded. She was struck in the head and then asphyxiated. But the $118,000 came from a previous annual bonus that John Ramsey had. And this thing about make sure you have an adequate size attaché to hold the bills and then getting the paper bag. John Ramsey, according to this book, actually did contact the bank and they set him up with a line of credit so he would be able to obtain the $118,000. But this is one thing that I think is truly perplexing, and that is the delivery will be exhausting, so I advise you to be rested. That to me just I'm just trying to imagine what actually would have been going on in someone's head when they're talking about the delivery will be exhausting. Like, even though JonBenet was already dead in the house, what were they thinking? Like, what's this exhausting delivery? But this also goes to show you that an abduction or a kidnapping is one of the most difficult crimes to get away with. And it's the whole concept of how does someone obtain the money? How does someone obtain the money without guaranteeing that the other people won't go to the authorities? I mean, maybe you got some guy like D.B. Cooper or something who found a way to get the money without being arrested. But with a lot of people, anytime there's some type of arrangement to get the money, they get interrupted and blindsided by the authorities. So what's this whole thing about the delivery will be exhausting? And if we monitor you getting the money early, we might call you to arrange an earlier delivery of the money, and hence a earlier pickup of your daughter. And I mean, that I can comprehend where Professor Stewart's coming from. It actually is a small foreign faction. The language is not purely incorrect, it's just a little bit odd, and some odd phrasing. Any deviation of my instructions will result in the immediate execution of your daughter. Now, this is also something that I think is very interesting. It's later goes on to state that there are two men watching over JonBenet, and then deviation from my instructions, which makes it rather clear that the person composing the letter or the text is the ringleader of this operation. But again, I mean, everything in here just seems to suggest that there's some group of people who have abducted JonBenet, and that there's some type of issue going on with John Ramsey's business and the most likely the United States government, the United States military, and what I believe that we were led to believe is something through Lockheed Martin, a company which John Ramsey had connections to, in dealing with defense contracts and so on. But if you alert bank authorities, she dies. If the money is scanned for, or if the money is marked or tampered with, she dies. You will be scanned for electronic devices. If any are found, she dies. That also, I think, is bizarre. It's like, how closely would they be monitoring and how intimate would they be getting with him if they're trying to scan him for devices? Of course, there is the conclusion that this is saying, don't grow a brain, you're not the only fat cat around. That, I think, is the strongest example of some type of awkward language, where I can comprehend how it is meant to show that they're mocking him, they're taunting him. Don't grow a brain means like, don't try to outsmart us, don't try to figure something out, or you're not very smart to begin with. Don't grow a brain, meaning you have the ability to become smarter. And again, that's just an odd thing to say particularly. And secondarily, you're not the only fat cat around. I mean, that could even be misusing the term fat cat. But what do you think about that claim that either the author of the text or the person who composed the ransom note was either not an American or not a native English speaker? Because it does state in the letter that it was written by a small foreign faction. And as far as details, though, we see that their name is SBTC, but we know absolutely nothing about them other than that, and that there are at least 3 people involved. And believe it or not, back in 2018, I had thought that there were 3 participants in the murder of JonBenet Ramsey, and I don't necessarily stand by that now. I mean, I'll believe whatever end result the FBI signs off on, but sometimes I was just pulled into the concept of it's possible for criminals to tell the truth. Now, a lot of us don't want to accept that. We just want to think that criminals are liars all the time, but it's possible that they are telling the truth. And some of you have probably been waiting patiently to hear, well, it could have just been one of the family members, either John, Patsy, or Burke, committed the murder of JonBenet, and then John Ramsey dictated the note to Patsy Ramsey, making up a silly story. Okay, we're going to say that we're a small foreign faction, and we have your daughter, and she's going to be beheaded, and that it's 2.5 pages for a reason, because they over-planned it, and there's something that they made up. They didn't have a lot of time to plan it, so they over-planned it, and they're adding in all these silly and wacky details about we are familiar with police countermeasures and so on. But that's just another example of the very technical language. I don't mean to repeat myself too much, but that is something that I just want to point out over and over again. But what do you think about the ransom note? Do you think that this is something that was written by a man or a woman? Do you believe that there actually was a small foreign faction? And lastly, do you believe that one of the family members was responsible for the composition of the ransom note? I would love to read your responses in the comment section down below. Anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio@AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box. And there was always BlackBoxNed88 over on Instagram. And I will see you there for the bonus podcast. Until next time.